Wonderful Fool by Shusaku Endo. Although this book is not as complex or as powerful as Endo's other work, Silence, I still enjoyed this book greatly, and it is an entertaining experience. Wonderful Fool follows Gaston Bonaparte, who travels to Japan to meet his pen pal, and throughout Japan has various misadventures and encounters various people. All the while, Gaston is left wondering, is there a place for people like him in the world? So that's the gist of the plot. Let me talk about characters for a minute. There are about 4 main characters we meet in A Wonderful Fool. There are the brother and sister, Takamori and Tomo. Takamori is Gaston's pen pal and initially has him over, and he's kind of just like a layabout. He mooches off his sister. He's good natured, but he's a bit lazy. He mooches off people, and he's rather go with the flow of life. Tomo, on the other hand, is a bit more workaholic. She doesn't see herself ever getting married, and she is really critical of people. She's always judgmental of Gaston in the book, and she always is nagging and thinking critically of her brother and her work friend. Well, I wouldn't really call him a friend, but yeah, she's really critical of people. And then, as I mentioned, Gaston, our leading man, he's rather simplistic. He's a big, lovable oaf. He stumbles around and gets into trouble because he's a foreigner who doesn't understand a lot about Japanese culture, and that partially gets him in trouble. And then he is also a really caring and kind person who just stumbles into trouble because he's too kind-hearted. And then lastly, there's Endo. Endo is a criminal who is given up on hope for humanity and on the goodness of people. He's out for revenge, and he believes that everyone else is as cold-hearted or as evil and cruel as he is. And it's that Endo specifically that Gaston chooses to help in his journey. Gaston sees something in Endo, and he wants to help him come away from his path, his dark path, and into a better, more brighter future. The characters are rather, I wouldn't say, they're not complex. They don't have huge overchanging arcs, but they do change in a sense. Both Tomo and Takamori do have their perceptions kind of shifted as they meet Gaston and get to understand him. And Endo too, without getting into spoilers, does slowly change as he meets Gaston and interacts with him more. I really liked Tomo, as she isn't too hardcore nagging at her brother where it gets annoying, because she brings up legitimate criticism of him being a lazy and him mooching off her all the time. With characters out of the way, I want to talk briefly about the prose of the story. This is written in, I think, third-person omniscient, or maybe a very broad third-person limited, as we kind of get sort of paragraphs not in anyone's perspective, but talking about a region or location of the world, of Japan rather. And at first it kind of, as someone who mainly reads third-person limited, it kind of took me out of it for a minute, but I slowly got used to Endo's writing style, and it helped immerse me more in the story and the settings we were visiting. After Endo meets Gaston, there's this brief passage about the city they're staying in and how it got hit by hard times, and how some women in this place have to resort to prostitution. It really hits you how sad this location is, and it's a melancholy moment. because it's raining. Gaston is in trouble. And it like really hits you how solemn it is. And speaking of that, the tone of this story starts out lighthearted. The siblings bicker and banter with each other, and it sets up the tone of being a kind of fun story with them interacting with Gaston and Gaston making several different faux pas. But it gets serious and even somber at times. I wouldn't say it's fully dark and gritty, but there are times where it hits you over how the tone, I wouldn't say it shifts like a whiplash. It's more of like a slow, gradual, well, here we are now, and it's a realistic portrayal of life. But it's not overly depressing, and it never feels like it's just heavy like Silence was. I will have to give a warning just in general. A dog does die in this. You don't see it on screen, but you do see its body corpse after it's dead, and it's a somber moment. It's one of the most somber of the book. And lastly, I'll hit on the themes. Well, Silence covered the silence of God and the suffering of Christians and the problem of evil while God remains silent. Wonderful Fool is about love. And yeah, I know that sounds cliche, but it's about that Christ-like love and how that can change people or how that affects people even if you don't ever get to see it. That's what Gaston's journey really is about, is he exudes this love to people, and it does help him and hinder him, and it really is a nice read, and it's an interesting take on a Christ figure in fiction. There's also some subtle critiques about Japanese society in general, but as I am not Japanese, nor am I well versed in Japanese culture of the 1970s, I am not that qualified on talking about them. One piece of critique on Japanese culture that I did pick up on was in the character Osako. Anyways, he's Tomo's co-worker, and in one of his chapters they meet him. He's in a French style cafe, and he's totally disrespecting Japanese culture and heritage and talking up French culture and behavior, and Endo is clearly trying to say people like this are kind of foolish and full of themselves. Lastly, I just want to say, I think what else helped me get into this book is how rather short it is. It's only about 240 pages, so it's not exactly a heavy read. And as someone who's primarily reads epic fantasy, it's a really nice change of pace from an overall heavy 1,000 page, 500 page fantasy book. And I think that's something else that helped me get into the book more. So, it's a charming book, and it has a nice pace to it. Yeah, that's my thoughts on Wonderful Fool by Shusaku Endo. I'm currently trying to write a review for Battle Royale, then I'll get into my thoughts on Silence, and I have a few other Shusaku Endo books that I want to get into, so if you want to see that, maybe subscribe. If you want to, leave a like on the video, comment your thoughts on the book if you've read it, or Shusaku Endo in general. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of the day or night, whatever you're experiencing this on. Boop, 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 boop.